Welcome back to Gaming's Biggest Scandals, the series where we examine the controversies, catastrophes, and corporate decisions that reshape the gaming industry. In 2017, one of the most powerful franchises in entertainment collided with one of the most controversial publishers in gaming, and the result was a scandal that reached far beyond angry players and online forums. What began as a Star Wars game quickly became a global debate about fairness, monetization, and whether modern video games were beginning to resemble gambling. Star Wars Battlefront II didn't just damage trust in a single title, it triggered government investigations, forced publishers to rethink how they monetize games, and permanently changed how players respond to pay-to-win systems. This is the story of the Battlefront II loot box scandal and how it changed gaming forever. Star Wars Battlefront II didn't just anger players, it exposed a growing tension between publishers and audiences, a tension that had been building for years, and at the center of that tension was Electronic Arts. By the time Battlefront 2 was announced, EA was already facing a significant trust deficit among players. Over the previous decade, EA had become synonymous with aggressive monetization, annualized franchises, and business decisions that often prioritized revenue over player goodwill. From controversial DLC practices to microtransactions embedded deep into gameplay progression, EA had repeatedly tested player tolerance. While some of these systems were financially successful, they came at a cost. Public perception of EA had steadily declined, and the company regularly appeared near the top of the worst company rankings in consumer polls. So when EA announced a new Star Wars Battlefront, a franchise tied to nostalgia, passion, and cultural significance, expectations were complicated. Players wanted to believe this would be different, but skepticism lingered. The first Star Wars Battlefront, released in 2015, had been visually impressive but widely criticized for its lack of content and shallow progression. Battlefront 2 was positioned as a response to those criticisms. EA promised a full single-player campaign, deeper multiplayer systems, and a long-term post-launch support. For Star Wars fans, this was meant to be a course correction. For EA, it was an opportunity to rebuild trust, but beneath those promises, the monetization model would undermine everything. As details emerged, players discovered that Battlefront 2's progression was built around loot boxes. These weren't cosmetic rewards. Loot boxes contained star cards that directly affected gameplay by enhancing abilities, weapons, and survivability. Progression without spending money was intentionally slow. Analysis showed that unlocking iconic characters like Darth Vader could require dozens or even hundreds of hours of play. Alternatively, players could purchase loot boxes with real money and dramatically accelerate their progress. This wasn't subtle, and coming from EA, a publisher already criticized for monetization practices, it was interpreted not as a misstep, but as a confirmation of long-held fears. As Backlash mounted, EA attempted to defend the system. On Reddit, an official EA account responded to criticism by stating that the design was intended to provide players with a sense of pride and accomplishment. It was downvoted hundreds of thousands of times, becoming the most downvoted comment in Reddit history. More importantly, it symbolized the disconnect between EA's corporate messaging and player reality. To many, it felt dismissive, another example of a publisher failing to acknowledge legitimate concerns. At that moment, the controversy exploded beyond gaming forums and into mainstream media. As launch approached, criticism intensified. Players organized boycotts. Content creators published breakdowns of how monetization affected competitive balance. Memes flooded social media, turning frustration into ridicule. Timing made everything worse. Battlefront 2 was launching alongside The Last Jedi, one of the most anticipated Star Wars films ever. Instead of riding that wave of excitement, EA found itself accused of damaging the Star Wars brand itself. Reports later suggested Disney began paying close attention, an alarming prospect for a publisher holding an exclusive Star Wars license. Just days before launch, EA disabled paid loot boxes entirely. The company framed the decision as willingness to listen to feedback and rebalance progression, but for many players, the move felt reactive rather than genuine. The systems hadn't been accidental, they had been designed, tested and approved, only reversed once Backlash became impossible to ignore. At launch, Battlefront II underperformed relative to expectations. Reviews praised its visuals and sound design, but nearly every outlet criticised the damage done to player trust. Even after changes, the game was defined by its controversy. What truly elevated the Battlefront II scandal was what happened next. Regulators in Belgium and the Netherlands began investigating loot boxes, comparing them to gambling. Their conclusions were clear: certain loot box systems violated gambling laws. Publishers were forced to remove or alter these mechanics in those regions. Suddenly, EA's monetization strategy wasn't just unpopular, it was legally questionable. Battlefront 2 had become the catalyst for a global conversation. In the years that followed, EA reworked Battlefront 2 significantly. Loot boxes were removed, progression was redesigned, and gameplay balance was improved. Ironically, many players later acknowledged that Battlefront 2 eventually became a genuinely solid game, but redemption couldn't erase the impact. After Battlefront 2, the industry shifted. Loot boxes became quieter, less aggressive, and often cosmetic only. Battle passes and alternative monetization systems took their place. The lesson was clear: players would tolerate monetization, but not at the expense of fairness. Star Wars Battlefront II became a warning cited whenever monetization discussions arose. For EA, the scandal reinforced a reputation that they have struggled to shake. It highlighted how years of trust erosion meant players were no longer willing to give the benefit of the doubt. Every decision was scrutinized, every misstep amplified. For the industry, Battlefront 2 marked a turning point. It proved that player backlash, media attention, and government oversight could combine to force change. It showed that monetization, when pushed too far, could threaten not just sales, but legitimacy. Star Wars Battlefront 2 didn't fail because it was broken. It failed because it crossed a boundary, one shaped by years of growing distrust towards a publisher that had already pushed players too far. It revealed the limits of monetization, the cost of ignoring player sentiment, and the danger of treating beloved franchises as revenue systems first and games second. Battlefront 2 launched as a scandal. It survived through reform, and it changed gaming, not because of what it was, but because of what it exposed. It showed that even the biggest franchises are not immune to consequences, and that players, when pushed too far, can force meaningful change. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe for more installments of gaming's biggest scandals, where we explore the moments that expose the gaming industry's biggest failures, and the lessons they left behind. Thanks for watching.